Hey, what's up? So, overall, this year, we're about 2 months in the year right now of 2018. It's like mid-February. Overall, this year, I felt like I've had a pretty good reading year. There weren't a lot of things that I read that I didn't like, that I didn't not like. Yeah. There are some really great things and some pretty okay things. So altogether, not too bad. Except this piece of work, this, thing of literary merit. I talked about this at a hall in one point. And so, of course, I bought it, so I figured I'd read it. It's a pretty short read. Only, how many pages? Only 151 pages. So not bad. It was split into 3 chapters, or it doesn't even feel right calling them chapters. 3 parts, I guess. I'm going to try to keep the first half of this as spoiler free as possible. And then I'll go into more details in the second half of this video. So if you're interested in picking this up, and you don't want to be spoiled, but you still want to watch me trash it because, I don't know, which is what I'm going to be doing, by the way. If you like this book, good for you. I'm glad you had a nice time reading it. I didn't, and I'm going to be shit-talking it because, yeah, that's my opinion, and that's what I'm going to discuss. I'd love to hear for people who like this book down in the comments if you disagree with anything that I say, that, we can have a nice discussion about it, and be civil. So, to keep this as a spoiler-free summary, basically, there was a man, I don't even think it mentioned his name, or it did, and I just overlooked it. There's a man who has a history of mistreating women, and then eventually he meets a woman who mistreats him. I guess that's a pretty easy way to keep it summarized. The kind of gimmick for this book is, if you look at the author name, it's anonymous. It's supposed to be like the author wrote this as a sort of confession, and he published it for whatever reason. That's kind of like what it's supposed to, how it's supposed to feel. And overall, it was not good. There were a couple of redeeming qualities that go into more detail, which I'll talk about later. There are a couple redeeming qualities, but not many. I didn't hate the storyline in general. The storyline of a man kind of getting like a sort of revenge story for this dude, for him, like, except being told from the victim and not the person getting revenge. Some sort of like cosmic justice is, I guess, how you could describe this. I'm not doing a very good job of describing it, but you get what I mean. I didn't have a problem with the story. I know a lot of people who read this had issues with how he treated women, which is understandable, but that's not going to draw me away from a story right away if it's about somebody who's just a bad person. That's not usually something that will change my mind. If I disagree with the character's actions, that doesn't mean that I'm going to not enjoy the story and not read the story. And it was presented in a way, it's difficult to say because it was first-person narrative, so it's difficult to say if the author really disagreed with how this man was acting. But there were kind of like signs that pointed to, like, like showing obviously what this guy's doing is wrong. What this guy's doing is pretty messed up. So the story was like all right. It could have been better. Like, it could have been more interesting. There could have been more with it. The pacing of the plot line was bad. It was really bad. The first chapter was an intro. Like, it took so long to get to the actual, like, plot. It took so long to, like, get to the actual, like, story of, like, this is the whole reason why I'm writing this book or whatever. Everything before it is just, like, build up, and it's not interesting to, I mean, it's not like, I wanted the story to come faster. It was, it's such a short book, so you would think there would be like more plot than what there was, instead of just like mostly build up. If you're looking for something that is kind of slow, if you like reading slow things, then maybe you'll like this. I don't know. The characters I felt no connection to. I just hated the main character, which again, that's not usually something that turns me off from a book. I'm just mentioning it just because it was an aspect of the book. I'm okay with unlikable characters. Some people aren't, which I get. And, this character didn't really sway me in any particular way when reading it. I didn't feel attachment to him. I really didn't like him. And the writing style was actually terrible. It was so bad. I'll go into more detail later in the spoiler section of this, but it was just like he was trying very hard. Whoever wrote this was trying very hard with their writing, and like it showed. It was obvious, and there were a couple of good like lines in there. It had a couple of good lines where like I highlighted or underlined, just because I liked it. Like, if he didn't try as hard as he did, if he didn't try so hard to make himself sound more like sophisticated, then it would have been fine. It would have been okay. But he did try, and it showed, and it didn't, his efforts didn't pay off. So that's all I can say without giving, a lot away. If you're interested in reading this, then go ahead. I will say that it was one of those books where I liked to hate, if that makes sense, which is why I kept reading it. Like, I enjoyed, kind of like roasting this book to myself, which is like fun to do now and then. But if you're like looking for something to actually get into, I would not recommend this one. But if you're looking for something lame, or if you are continuing on to this part of the video, I'm assuming you don't care about spoilers, or maybe you've already read the book and you hated it too and you want to talk about it, or you really liked it and you're like, why did you hate it? So to go into more detail, I will kind of break down what happened, like what I didn't like. So back to what I was saying, when the pacing was too slow, the first chapter was like everything wrong this guy did, like a summary of like how he abused women and what he did when abusing women, like how he kind of manipulated them, how he kind of manipulated women was just getting into a relationship with them and like forming a connection, but then all of a sudden like looking at like one day like switching it off and just telling her like, I don't like you, I hate you, like just insulting them, and really like hurting them, which is fucked up. It's a fucked up thing to do. And like that is all like the first part was. The second part was like his life after that, like once he decided like, I'm kind of bored with ruining women's life, maybe I should do something myself. It was just like information about his time in, where was he, Wisconsin? He was in the Midwest. This guy's Irish, I think he works in the advertisement, Minnesota. He was in Minnesota, which is basically Wisconsin. That's probably not true. I don't know anything about the United States. I don't pay attention to the world. So anyway, he was living in Minnesota for his advertising job, and it was just so boring reading about it. Not because, like, advertising itself is boring, but because there was, like, you could have made this more interesting. You could have made his, like, kind of, like, trying to be a home man life much more interesting. All he did was complain about how he hated his job, how he hated where he was living, how he wanted to fuck all these women, and how like he hated his boss and whatever. And yeah, it was just that. It was just this asshole complaining for like a big chunk of the book. Like the largest portion of the book is the second chapter, the second part. So like that wasn't fun to read, and he kept hinting towards like this girl who changes his life, but he wouldn't like actually talk about her. Like he didn't give any details about her. And then when he finally does meet the girl, Aisling, I think it's an Irish name, So I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. He met Aisling, and I figured out what she was doing right away. Like, right away. I don't know if I was supposed to. I don't know if I was supposed to feel any suspense towards, like, trying to figure it out. It kind of seemed like I was supposed to. But it was just so obvious. Like, what was happening is he was dating this girl, and he knew that she was kind of pulling away from him because he had done the same thing with girls, but there's something weird going on, and for whatever reason, she keeps taking pictures of him, and people keep taking pictures of them. And the girl is a photographer, and she says she's working on a book, a more experimental thing. And so, like, yeah, I figured it out. She was making a book about, like, her relationship with men and, like, breaking their hearts or whatever. Like, that was, like, pretty obvious. Which, like, that could have been really interesting. That could have been a really interesting, like, twist. But it wasn't. It wasn't even, like, a large part of, like, the chapter of, like, this last part. It's hard to even say what was, like, the majority of this chapter because there was so little to the story. Like, there was... It gave you a lot of ideas, and it gave you a lot of, stuff that was going on, but, like, it didn't even go into, like, anything worth reading about. It was just him talking about how he wanted to fuck this girl and how he was worried and insecure or whatever. Like, it was so dumb. And the big reveal, the part where you realize everything was so awkward. Like, she took him to this bar, and everybody there was, like, taking pictures of him. Like, it was, like, the photo shoot, like, the final, like, scene or whatever. And it was just so, like, bland and awkward. Like, he didn't, get angry. He didn't get upset. He just kind of sat there and was like, oh, what's going on? Like, it was dumb. It was just so stupid. So, yeah. That's the plot. Like, that's everything that happens. And, like, it wasn't good. It wasn't interesting. It could have been interesting. It could have been an interesting plot, but it really wasn't. And part of, again, that had to do a lot with the pacing, and it had to do a lot with the author's specific style of writing, which is another thing I'm going to get into about what I hated. But real quick, I do want to mention another thing that the story could have done was the main character is an alcoholic, and I haven't read about many, like, addicts or alcoholics, honestly, not that I remember, so reading about that was, like, kind of interesting, and the perspective, like, the way his relationship with alcohol could have been very interesting to read about. It could have been a better, like, it could have been a bigger plot device, like, a bigger part of the story, but it was brushed off. Like, the first chapter, he talked about his, that's when he mostly talked about his, alcoholism. The second chapter, he was clean, and he was talking about how it was difficult, but again, that was just more complaining. And then the last chapter, it was, like, mentioned now and then, but not in a very interesting way. So I wish that was dealt with more. That would have, I feel like, helped the story, and at least added another element to this man, to this character, and everything. Now, the writing was awful. It was just very bad. He was trying really hard. It wasn't good. Like, there's not much I can say about it. It was so lame and so cheesy, and, like, I highlighted a couple of lines, because they were so bad. He was talking about a charity thing he did with, children with AIDS, and how, you know, it's one of the more photogenic charities, because he works in advertising, it's one of the more photogenic, like, better charities, like, the more glamorous charities. Adults with AIDS are no good. It could be their own fault. What the fuck? What the fuck? Why would you say that? Why would you say that? I hate it. Why, you know? Like, again, like I said, unlikable characters isn't, like, that's not necessarily, you know, something that bothers me, but I don't know, I just can't take reading the narration of somebody who's just, like, this bad of a person and thinks, like, all these shitty things. Another passage I found, I simply wrote, "Fuck you for writing this line." It says, "It is my humble opinion that a lot of the civil rights protests, and indeed a good portion of this fine country's problems, including the Civil War and the assassination of more than one president, can be contributed to the absence of air conditioning." I don't remember the context of this line, and, like, it's like, he's trying to have these, like, deep epiphanies of, like, I don't know, he's just trying so hard to, like, be, like, a different thinker, be, like, more of a nihilist or a cynic, and it just comes off as him being an asshole. There are some things that he wrote, again, where he's trying to, like, sound different, that just came off as not really, like, pretentious or, like, asshole-ish or, like, dickish, but just weird. For example, he refers to tears as salty eye droplets. Is that supposed to be funny? Was that supposed to make me laugh? Because it didn't. I just felt embarrassed for whoever wrote down those words and thought, yes, this is good. I'm going to send this in and this will be fine. There's a paragraph where he tries to talk about what he does to entice women and, like, how he, like, attracts women, and he, like, writes, like, several sentences just about the act of blushing, and I had to read the word blush so many times that I now hate the word blush. Attraction. Try a blush. Not easy, this. And a blush usually begot a blush. That is, if I can muster a blush, she was more than likely to blush back. I hated that. Why did you have to write blush so many times? And now, like, the more I say it, the more I hate it. I hated that. There are 2 lines on this page that, like, that both of them I wrote, "This is my new favorite terrible line." Okay, so this next line, that I was forced to read with my own 2 eyes was when he's talking about getting in, like, getting to know the woman that he gets to know and eventually fucks over. He calls the getting to know you process a sitcom I had to sit through, but it was okay because I knew I'd be writing her out of the series. I hated that. Like, I just hated that line. That was just a stupid line. Another one that was stupid is when he was talking about walking a girl he slept with, walking her daughter to school the next day, and apparently this has happened a couple of times, which that sounds weird. That sounds like something that, I don't know. I mean, I don't have kids, so I can't relate. It was just a weird thing to read, but, anyway, he makes the comparison of, like the Native American and the buffalo, the Eskimo and the seal, the welfare mother and me. I hated that. I hated that line, and that's really all I can take from this book. It was a bad book. There's a sequel, or prequel, or whatever the fuck it is. And then I saw on Goodreads there is a possible 3rd book, which I'm picking neither of those up. I wish I knew this author's name, so I can never read anything that he wrote again. This is apparently a New York Times bestseller. I don't know why. I don't know why it would be a New York Times bestseller. I'm actually going to go out of my way to find the author of this book so I can never read anything that he wrote again. It was a story with a little bit of potential, but ended up being pretty stupid, with a character who thought very highly of himself and was just a huge asshole, and writing that thought very highly of itself, but made him sound like a huge asshole. Overall, I do not recommend this book. I don't remember, I think I gave it 2 stars, only because I at least had fun when reading it. I sometimes, it's nice to hate things. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person who thinks that. But maybe not. Maybe you guys like to hate read books too, and if you do, then I would recommend hate reading this one, because it's, it's not long, it won't take up too much of your time, and it's very stupid. Again, if you liked this book, that's great. I can sort of see why maybe somebody would. Maybe you like that kind of writing style. Maybe you like that kind of character. I don't know. Not every book is going to be my favorite book, just like not every book is going to be your favorite book. That's the way things work. So thank you for watching. Go ahead and leave a comment telling me if you've read this book or have any plans to read this book, and maybe what you thought about it. And we can all have a discussion about it. That'd be great. Leave a like or a dislike, maybe if I hurt your feelings, and subscribe if you want to see more content from me. And yeah.